The velvet of the seat felt cool against my bare arms, a small anchor in the swirling sea of anticipation that was the Guggenheim Rotunda. Every eye in the world of architecture was on that stage, a stark white platform against the museum's iconic spiral. For 7 years, my world had been a universe of blueprints, steel skeletons, and glass skin. Tonight, that universe was supposed to get its sun. The Viridian? My building, my soul, rendered in concrete and light. From my seat in the third row, I could see the back of Julian Croft's perfectly tailored head. He was the developer, the money, the handsome face of the project. He turned slightly, catching my eye, and gave me a brilliant smile, a flash of white teeth that had charmed investors and city officials alike. I smiled back, a genuine, hopeful smile. We had done it. Against all odds, we had brought a living, breathing building to the heart of New York City. The announcer's voice boomed, echoing through the space. The Ethelred Prize for Project of the Year goes to the Viridian. The room erupted. A wave of applause washed over me, and for a second I felt my feet lift off the ground. Julian stood up, buttoning his tuxedo jacket. He turned to me, his eyes sparkling under the lights. "This is it, Belle," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and prepared to stand with him. But he just squeezed my shoulder, a quick, dismissive pat, and strode toward the stage alone. I froze, my body halfway out of the seat. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Maybe he was going to accept on behalf of the team. Maybe he would call me up. I watched as he bounded onto the stage, accepting the heavy, gold-plated award. He held it up, basking in the applause. The lights caught the angles of his face, making him look like a conquering hero. "Thank you," he began, his voice smooth as polished marble. "Thank you to the committee. When I first envisioned the Viridian, people told me it was impossible. The word hit me like a physical blow. I envisioned it, not we." He continued, weaving a masterful story of his singular struggle, his tireless vision to create a sustainable icon for the city. He talked about the challenges, the sleepless nights, the unwavering belief in his own dream. I sat there, pinned to my seat, as he painted me out of my own masterpiece, stroke by insidious stroke. Then came the final, brutal erasure. "Of course," he said with a magnanimous smile, "I must give a small credit to my design team, and particularly to a junior design assistant, Belle Walsh, whose early concepts, while raw, provided a foundation for me to build upon." The camera found me. I could feel its lens on me, a cold, unblinking eye broadcasting my humiliation to the entire world. I held my expression perfectly still, a mask of polite appreciation, while inside my heart shattered. Junior design assistant. 7 years of my life, my sweat, my tears, the very soul I had poured into every beam and every pane of glass, reduced to a footnote. The applause was deafening, but all I could hear was the rushing of blood in my ears. The dream had become a nightmare. The after-party was a blur of champagne flutes and hollow congratulations directed at Julian. I stood in a corner, the ghost at the feast, when a heavy hand landed on my shoulder. It was Arthur Croft, Julian's father, the real power behind the Croft Corporation. His eyes were small and cold like chips of granite. "A fine night for my son," he said, his voice a low rumble. He wasn't congratulating me, he was dismissing me. "He gave a memorable speech," I replied, my voice dangerously steady. "Indeed," Arthur said, taking a sip of his scotch. "He's ready to take the reins, which brings me to you, Ms. Walsh. Your contributions, such as they were, are no longer required. Your contract is terminated, effective immediately." I stared at him, speechless. Fired, on the night of my greatest triumph, which was also the night of my greatest theft. "Thank you for helping get the project off the ground," he added, a cruel twist to his thin lips. "The Croft Corporation will see it to completion from here." He turned and walked away, leaving me in his wake. I tried to walk toward the exit, but a polite but firm security guard stopped me. I reached for my wallet to show him my ID, my all-access pass to the site. "I'm sorry, Ms. Walsh," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Your access has been revoked." My keycard, my digital key to my own creation, was already useless. I walked out of the Guggenheim into a soft New York drizzle. The city lights blurred through the rain on the pavement. I didn't hail a cab. I just stood there, letting the cool water run down my face, washing away the heat of my anger and the sting of my tears. But I wasn't crying. A strange, glacial calm was spreading through me, freezing the turmoil in my chest. They thought they had won. They thought they could steal my work, erase my name, and cast me aside. They had the building, the award, the glory, but they had made one catastrophic mistake. They didn't own the soul of the building. I did, and I was about to prove it to them. Back in my small Brooklyn apartment, the city glittered on the other side of the river, a galaxy of indifferent lights. The Viridian wasn't visible from here, but I could feel it, a phantom limb of my own body. I poured myself a glass of red wine, the deep Cabernet the color of blood, and sat down at my drafting table. The award ceremony was replaying on a news loop on my laptop. I watched Julian's smug face and clicked it off. It was time to stop reacting and start planning. I pulled up the old project files on my personal server, files the Crofts had never seen. The warning signs were all there, hidden in plain sight. Julian's sudden, intense interest in the core environmental protocols 2 months ago, the endless requests for simplified schematics, the closed-door meetings with the engineering consultants, meetings I was told were just boring budget stuff. I had been too trusting, too focused on the work to see the knife being sharpened. My mind drifted back to David Chen. My mentor, my professor, the architectural genius who had seen something in me when I was just a student. He had been the original mind behind the sustainable tech that made the Viridian possible. Before he died, he had made me his protege, entrusting his life's work to me. I remembered a conversation we'd had, years ago, over coffee in his cluttered office. "Belle," he'd said, his eyes kind but serious. "The world is full of men like the Crofts. They have money and power, but no vision. They will always try to take from creators like us, so you must be smarter. Never, ever give them the whole blueprint. Always keep the cornerstone for yourself." And I had listened. 3 days after David's funeral, I had flown to Delaware and incorporated the Hearthstone Trust. It was a simple, anonymous entity, established for the sole purpose of holding one thing: the patents for David's revolutionary environmental management system, the Hearthstone Protocol. It was the building's beating heart, its nervous system. It controlled everything, from the solar panel energy distribution to the gray water recycling to the smart window tinting that adjusted to the sun's position. It was the secret sauce that would allow the Viridian to achieve the coveted LEED Platinum certification, unlocking millions in government tax credits and satisfying the demands of its primary investors. The Croft Corporation didn't own that technology. They had a license to use it. A license buried deep within the appendices of a third-party materials supply contract. Appendix C, Section 12, page 314. A Trojan horse I had personally placed in a mountain of paperwork I knew their lazy legal team would never read thoroughly. My phone buzzed. It was a call from Croft's head of human resources, a woman named Carol who had always been pleasant to me. "Belle," she began, her voice professionally sympathetic. "I'm so sorry about how this all went down. I'm calling to discuss the terms of your severance package." I took a slow sip of my wine. The calm had settled deep in my bones. "There's no need, Carol," I said, my voice even. "Just do me a favor. Tell Julian he might want to have his legal team take a very close look at Appendix C, Section 12 of the materials contract, and tell them to prepare for overtime." I hung up before she could respond. My next calls were to 3 of the most aggressive intellectual property law firms in the country. I didn't need just one shark, I needed a whole school of them. As I was outlining my strategy, an encrypted message popped up on my screen. It was from Liam, a brilliant junior architect I had mentored on the project, a kid with a keen eye and an even keener sense of loyalty. "Belle, what they did was disgusting," the message read. "Julian is parading around the office like he's a king. They're locking down all your files. I don't know what you're planning, but if you need eyes and ears on the inside, I'm your guy." A small, real smile touched my lips for the first time that night. I wasn't entirely alone. My final step for the evening was the most important. I logged into the secure online portal for the Hearthstone Trust, a Spartan interface that only I had access to. On the dashboard was a single, blinking cursor, waiting for the weekly authentication code. This code, a complex alphanumeric string, was required to keep the Hearthstone protocol running at peak efficiency. Without it, the system wouldn't crash. It wouldn't send up an error flag. No, David had designed it to be far more subtle. Without the weekly handshake, the entire system would quietly revert to a low-power, baseline state. It would function at about 30% of its capacity. The lights would stay on, the water would run, but the building would start to bleed energy. The solar panels would underperform. The water recycling would become inefficient. The delicate environmental symbiosis I had spent years calibrating would fall apart. It would become a beautiful, dumb glass box. A very, very expensive glass box that was about to fail every single one of its contractual obligations to its green-focused investors. The cursor blinked, waiting. I closed the laptop. The code would not be coming this week. The cornerstone had been removed. Now I would just wait for the beautiful house of cards to start to tremble. The silence was the first sign. Not the silence in my apartment, which was a welcome cocoon, but the digital silence from the Croft Corporation. For 3 days after the awards, my phone and email remained dead. No angry calls, no threatening letters from lawyers. It was unnerving. They were either too arrogant to have noticed the problem yet, or they were scrambling behind the scenes, trying to solve a puzzle without realizing they were missing the most important piece. On the morning of the 4th day, I got my answer. A message from Liam, scrambled through 3 layers of encryption. Energy reports are a mess. Consumption is through the roof. The engineers are blaming faulty sensors. I smiled. Faulty sensors. Of course. They were looking for a broken wire, a line of bad code. They were mechanics trying to fix a watch, not realizing the mainspring had been removed. Another message came through that afternoon. Julian is furious. He's demanding a full diagnostic. The third-party engineering firm is coming in tomorrow. Let them come. They could run diagnostics for a year. They would find a perfectly functioning system running exactly as it was designed to on low-power mode. A system waiting for a key they didn't know existed. The true tremors began a week later. The first call wasn't to me. It was to Julian Croft, and it came from Verdant Future Capital, the eco-focused investment fund that had poured $400 million into the project. Their entire investment was predicated on the Veridian achieving LEED Platinum certification. Without it, the deal was dead, and massive financial penalties would kick in. Liam's message was short and electric. Verdant is on a warpath. Their preliminary analysis shows the building won't even qualify for LEED Silver right now. Julian just threw a tablet against his office wall. They're demanding a meeting. That was the signal. It was time to arm myself. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of intense, focused creation, not with steel and glass, but with words and statutes. With the help of my new legal team, I compiled a 50-page legal memorandum. It was a masterpiece of cold, hard fact. It contained the corporate filings for the Hearthstone Trust. It contained David Chen's original dated patents. It contained a timeline of the design process, supported by timestamped metadata from my personal server. And it contained a brutally clear analysis of Appendix C, Section 12, highlighting the licensing agreement. It was an airtight, undeniable narrative of my ownership and their deception. This document was my weapon. I uploaded it to a secure, encrypted digital vault. I then sent an automated instruction to my legal team. If they did not receive a specific confirmation code from me every 24 hours, the vault would automatically unlock, and a copy of the memorandum would be sent directly to the CEO of Verdant Future Capital. It was my insurance policy, my dead man's switch. As I was putting the final touches on the document, my phone finally buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize, but a tone I knew all too well. It was Julian. "We can talk. What do you want?" He still thought it was about money. He still thought he could buy my silence, buy my soul. He thought I was a problem to be managed. He hadn't yet realized I was the storm that was about to break over his head. I replied with a single character, a period, a full stop. The end of our conversation. Let him sweat. His real problem wasn't with me anymore. It was with his investors, and their meeting was scheduled for the next morning. The offices of Verdant Future Capital were on the 60th floor of a skyscraper overlooking Central Park. The air was thin up there and expensive. I walked into the conference room not as a fired employee, but as the master of my own fate. I had chosen a tailored Navy power suit, a piece of armor that made me feel formidable. The room was a gallery of tense faces. At the head of the massive oak table sat Alina Vance, the CEO of Verdant Future. She was a woman in her late 60s with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that could chip diamonds. Beside her were her lawyers. On the other side sat Julian and Arthur Croft, flanked by their own legal team. They looked haggard. A space had been left for a neutral third party. A renowned systems engineer Verdant had flown in from MIT. And then there was me, with my lead counsel, a sharp woman named Maria. "Ms. Walsh, thank you for coming," Alina began, her voice devoid of warmth. "As you can imagine, we are deeply concerned. Our reports indicate a catastrophic failure in the energy efficiency of the Veridian. The Croft Corporation has been unable to provide a satisfactory explanation." Arthur Croft scoffed. "This is a technical glitch, Alina, nothing more, and it is being used by a disgruntled former employee to extort us." I didn't look at him. I addressed Alina directly, my voice calm and measured. "There is no glitch, Ms. Vance. The system is operating perfectly. What the Croft Corporation has failed to understand is that they do not own the system. They merely have a license to use it, a license which is contingent upon certain factors which are no longer being met. I nodded to Maria, who placed a tablet in the center of the table. With a tap, the 50-page memorandum appeared on the large screen at the end of the room. What you've purchased, Ms. Vance, I continued, as I walked them through the key points, is a body. A beautiful one, I admit, but I, through the Hearthstone Trust, own its central nervous system. The room was silent as the evidence scrolled by, the patents, the development logs, and finally a high-resolution scan of Appendix C, Section 12. I saw Julian's face go pale. Arthur's jaw was clenched so tight I thought it might crack. Eleanor turned to the MIT engineer. Dr. Liang, your assessment. The engineer, a man who had spent the last 24 hours analyzing the building's data, pushed his glasses up his nose. She's right, he said simply. The core architecture of the environmental system is proprietary and brilliant. Frankly, without the full, active protocol, the Viridian is just a pretty dumb glass cage. Re-engineering a new system from scratch would take, optimistically, 3 years and cost upwards of $200 million. And there's no guarantee it would meet the platinum standard. The air in the room became ice. Eleanor Vance's lawyer spoke for the first time, his voice like closing a vault door. Mr. Croft, he said, looking at Arthur, if you have been fundraising and pre-leasing this building based on a LEED Platinum certification that you knew, or should have known, you could not guarantee, that moves us out of the realm of contract dispute and into the realm of securities fraud. Fraud. The word hung in the air, deadly and final. Julian finally broke. This is insane. Belle, what do you want? Just tell us what you want. I let the silence stretch for a moment, enjoying the exquisite panic in his eyes. I'm not here to negotiate with you, Julian, I said softly. My issue was never with the money. I turned my full attention back to Eleanor. The Crofts have a problem, Ms. Vance. They have lied to you. They have built a legacy on a foundation of theft, but the building itself. The Viridian, it deserves to exist as it was designed. It can still be the icon we all wanted it to be. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. She understood. This was no longer about punishing the guilty. It was about saving the investment. What do you propose, Ms. Walsh? She asked. I propose a public clarification, I said. The Crofts will hold a press conference, not to announce a technical glitch, but to announce a correction, an amendment to the record. They will publicly acknowledge the Hearthstone Trust as a primary partner in the project, and me, Belle Walsh, as the chief architect of the Viridian. They will correct the lie. Arthur Croft slammed his hand on the table. Absolutely not. We will not be publicly humiliated. Eleanor Vance shot him a look that could freeze fire. You misunderstand your position, Arthur, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Your humiliation is no longer my primary concern. My $400 million is. She looked at me. They will hold the press conference. What else? For now, I said, that is all. Once my role and the role of the trust has been publicly and legally affirmed, I will reinstate the authentication code, on a provisional basis. They were trapped. Their egos, their reputations, their freedom, all hanging by a thread that I now controlled. They had 48 hours to schedule the press conference. They thought it was about saving their project. They didn't realize it was about building their own public gallows. The press conference was held in the grand, unfinished atrium of the Viridian. The raw concrete and exposed steel beams felt like a fitting backdrop for the deconstruction of a lie. I watched on a laptop from a small coffee shop across the street, a ghost observing her own resurrection. Liam sat with me, too nervous to drink his coffee, his eyes glued to the screen. Julian Croft stepped up to the podium, his face a carefully constructed mask of sincerity. He looked smaller under the harsh glare of the TV lights, diminished. He began with a series of empty platitudes about transparency and partnership. He was trying to control the narrative, to spin this as a minor oversight. But the story was no longer his to write. As he spoke, a journalist in the front row raised her hand. She was from a major architectural journal, and her question had been meticulously crafted by my legal team. Mr. Croft, she said, her voice sharp and clear. Can you comment on reports from your primary investors that the building's core environmental systems are underperforming by nearly 70%? And is it true that the intellectual property for these systems is not owned by the Croft Corporation, but by a separate entity known as the Hearthstone Trust, founded by your project's chief architect, Belle Walsh? The question landed like a grenade. A murmur swept through the room. Julian's mask slipped. For a fraction of a second, Raw panic flashed in his eyes. He stammered, trying to deflect, talking about the complexities of construction, but the reporter pressed on. "It's a direct question, Mr. Croft. Do you or do you not own the technology that makes this building viable?" All cameras were on him. There was no escape. His shoulders slumped in microscopic defeat. Arthur, standing behind him, looked apoplectic. Before Julian could formulate another lie, my lawyer, Maria, stepped calmly into the frame. She wasn't scheduled to be there, and her appearance caused another stir. She walked to the podium and handed Julian a single sheet of paper. "My client, Ms. Belle Walsh, thought it might be helpful to provide a statement of fact to clarify the situation for the press," Maria announced to the room. The cameras zoomed in on the paper in Julian's trembling hand. He had a choice: read the truth I had written for him, or be exposed as a fraud on live television. He took a deep breath, his face pale. He began to read, his voice flat and robotic. He admitted that the core technology was licensed from the Hearthstone Trust. He admitted that I was the chief architect of the project. He admitted that his previous statements had been an incomplete representation of the project's leadership. It was a humiliating, public unraveling. The press conference devolved into chaos, a feeding frenzy of questions he couldn't answer. Across the street, I closed my laptop. Phase 1 was complete. They hadn't just lost face. They had lost all leverage. The final negotiation was not held in a boardroom. It was a video call. I took it from my own apartment, with the Brooklyn Bridge framed behind me. They were all there, huddled in their conference room of shame: Julian, Arthur, their lawyers, and a representative from Verdant Future. They looked like defeated generals. I was no longer the petitioner. I was the victor dictating the terms of surrender. "I believe we now have a clearer understanding of the situation," I began, my voice even. Arthur Croft, ever defiant, spoke first. "All right, Walsh. You've had your fun, you've made your point. We'll reinstate you. We'll give you a raise, a title, stock options. Name your price." I almost laughed. "Mr. Croft, you are still operating under the delusion that I want to work for you. Let me be perfectly clear. That is never going to happen. This is not a negotiation for my employment. This is a restructuring of the entire project." I laid out my terms. They were not requests. They were conditions. 1, I said. The Hearthstone Trust will be granted a 25% equity stake in the Viridian, not in the profits. In the building itself, we are no longer a contractor. We are owners. Their lawyers began to whisper frantically. 2, the Croft Corporation will be bought out of their management contract for the completion of the project. A new contract will be awarded to my new firm, Hearthstone Design, which will see the project through to its conclusion. You will become what you should have been all along: silent financial partners. Julian's face was ashen. I was taking his building away from him, piece by piece. 3, the non-compete clauses for 5 key members of my former design team will be immediately nullified. They will be free to join Hearthstone Design without penalty. I already had their letters of resignation, waiting to be sent. And 4, I finished, looking directly at Julian through the screen. I want a written, personal apology. Not for the press, for me, acknowledging the theft of my work and the attempt to erase my contribution. Arthur looked like he was about to have a stroke. "This is preposterous. You're trying to steal my company." "No, Mr. Croft," I corrected him gently. "I am saving your investment from the consequences of your son's fraud. These are the terms. They are not negotiable. You have 24 hours to have your lawyers draft the contracts. If I do not have them by noon tomorrow, I will be forced to conclude that you are not interested in a partnership. And I will sell an exclusive, perpetual license for the Hearthstone Protocol to your biggest competitor. Your choice." I ended the call. It didn't take 24 hours. The draft agreements arrived in my lawyer's inbox in under 12. The aftermath was swift and brutal. 2 weeks after the contracts were signed, the Croft Corporation announced that Julian Croft was stepping down as CEO to pursue new opportunities. He was quietly forced out by the board and by Verdant Future Capital. Arthur Croft announced his retirement a month later. Their names, once synonymous with New York real estate, were now a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms across the country. Their dynasty was broken. My new beginning rose from the ashes of their empire. Hearthstone Design set up its headquarters on the 45th and 46th floors of the Viridian itself. My team, my loyal, brilliant team, came with me. Liam became my head of product development. We didn't just complete the building, we perfected it. We turned it into a living masterpiece of sustainable architecture, a building that breathed with the city. It won dozens of awards, this time with the right name listed as Chief Architect. The final scene of my revenge was not one of conflict, but of peace. It happened a year later, on the evening we officially received the LEED Platinum certification. I was standing on the rooftop garden of the Viridian, a lush oasis of green 70 stories above the concrete grid of Manhattan. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The city spread out before me like a carpet of jewels. Liam and the rest of the team were there, celebrating with champagne. The sound of their laughter drifted on the cool evening breeze. I walked to the edge of the terrace, the low glass wall the only thing between me and the sky. I could feel the gentle hum of the building beneath my feet, the subtle vibrations of the Hearthstone protocol at work. It was alive. It was mine. I thought back to that night at the Guggenheim, the sting of humiliation, the cold rage. It felt like a lifetime ago, a scene from someone else's story. The desire for revenge, the fire that had fueled me for months, had burned itself out. In its place was something quieter and infinitely more powerful, a sense of profound, unshakable peace. I hadn't just won back my building. I had won back my name, my future, my self-respect. I had built a new legacy not on the destruction of my enemies, but on the foundation of my own resilience. The best revenge wasn't a victory, it was freedom. And standing there, above the city that I had helped to reshape, I was finally completely free.